Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I'm Nick Neely, an assistant professor of English writing here at Eastern Oregon University and a member of our faculty of our low residency MFA program in creative writing. Welcome to this Ars Poetica reading and conversation featuring poet Sara Eliza Johnson and her new book, Vapor, which I have here to hold up. She'll be reading for us, and then we'll be in conversation with one of our, another faculty member in our MFA program, Christopher Condrich. As people settle in, I'm gonna just drop a few links, hopefully helpful links and reminders in the chat. If I can do this. I wanted to just mention that we have one more Ars Poetica event scheduled for this winter term. It'll be both in person and online. Essayist Adrienne Shirk will be in conversation with me about her book, Heaven is a Place on Earth, Searching for an American Utopia. This will be at the EOU library here in La Grande and also live streamed. The link to come, but we'll make sure that you receive that via email. You can always check out our Ars Poetica webpage for future announcements and videos of past events. We've got a YouTube channel to check out, and also trying to rev up our Twitter account. So if that's for you, I hope you'll give us a follow. I also provided links to the featured artists and their books tonight, which I'll hope you will explore those and purchase a copy at your local bookstore or wherever you buy books. As we set off, I also wanted to begin with a brief land acknowledgement, which I know is an inadequate gesture by far, but a place to begin. Many of us are in La Grande in northeastern Oregon, where EOU is located. So I would like to say, we humbly acknowledge the original inhabitants of the land Eastern Oregon University is upon, the Cayuse, Umatilla, Walla Walla, and Nez Perce people. We celebrate their traditions, languages, and stories. We acknowledge their continuing connection to this land, water, and community, and pay our respects to these original stewards of northeastern Oregon. Thanks. Here's how tonight will work. I'll briefly introduce Christopher, followed by Sara, and she'll then read for about 20 minutes from Vapor. Christopher will then pop back onto your screen, and he and Sara will talk about the book back and forth for another 20 or 25 minutes. And we hope you'll jump in the chat, or better still, using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen with any questions you might have. Christopher will weave them in towards the end of their discussion as he can. So let me first introduce Christopher Condrich. We're very fortunate that he's teaching for us in the low residency program. He's the author of Valuings, selected by Jericho Brown as a winner of the National Poetry Series and published by the University of Georgia Press. It was named a Best Poetry Book of 2019 by Library Journal and was a finalist for the Believer Book Award in Poetry. Christopher is also the author of a book-length poem, Contrapunto, from Free Verse Editions. His poetry and essays appear widely in venues including The Believer, the Kenyon Review, the New York Review of Books, and the Paris Review. He has received fellowships from the MacDowell Colony, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the iPark Foundation, and others. An associate editor for the journal 32 Poems, he is currently a visiting assistant professor of poetry at the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts. And again, we're lucky that he teaches for us as well on the side. And now to introduce our featured poet for the evening, Sara Eliza Johnson. Sara's first book, Bone Map, was also a winner of the National Poetry Series and was published by Milkweed Editions in 2014. Her poetry and nonfiction have appeared in journals including the Virginia Quarterly Review, Colorado Review, Boston Review, and the New England Review, among many other great journals. She's the recipient of an astounding number of honors, including a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in Poetry, a Rona Jaffe Foundation Writers Award, and fellowships from the Fine Arts Work Center in Provincetown. She currently teaches creative writing far from Provincetown up in Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Her second poetry book, Vapor, which she's presenting tonight, was published again by Milkweed last year. And Milkweed says of it, quote, with a mind informed by physics and a heart yearning for sky burial, Vapor's epic vision swerves from the microscopic to the telescopic, evoking an Anthropocene for a body and a planet that are continually dying. Almost omnipresently, Vapor stitches stars to microbes, oceans to space, and love to pain, collapsing time and space to converge everything at once. Sara, thanks so much for making time to be with us tonight, and can't wait to hear you read.
Thank you, Nick and Chris, for hosting and for having me and inviting me, and thank everybody for coming. I'm just going to read straight through in the order in which these poems appear in the book. And I'm going to start with the first poem. It's called Planktonic Foraminifera. And foraminifera are single-celled organisms that we still have today that their fossils date back to the earliest Cambrian era, which is 570 million years ago. Planktonic foraminifera. Before microbes clustered to gleam, like the scales of alien fish, across the back of your hand, your eyelashes, your lips. Before the first sunlight wormed through the sleep behind your eyes. Before worms hollowed out the long tooth of the tiger in the valley, where now the milk cows dust their mouths with petals and powdered bone. Where the hearts of the dead are blood crystals rotting inside their chests. Before there were bodies as far as sunlight can see, more than the light could bury, black water covered the planet, and within that ocean, plankton glowed, constellations that sank into the seabed became fossilized translations for thought, the first dream, for all language you try to protect. Written into the basalt, cornea, follicle, fingernail moon, wrist vein, feral bloom. The ocean, like all oceans, tried to give the earth a message it could not articulate before disappearing. The vibration you can still feel when you press your forehead to anything alive or dead. The next poem is called The Abyssal Zone, and that refers basically to the deepest, darkest part of the ocean. There's a fish in here, the angler fish. That's the fish you've probably seen that looks extremely terrifying and has the little light coming out of its head. That's the anglerfish. Sometimes it's seaweed in your throat you can't cough out, or an ink cloud expanding in your skull. Sometimes it's primal, like the force of an oyster making a pearl to protect itself after a harvester surgically implants its poison, or the heart growing a tumor that can't be extracted without killing you, or pressure crushing your lungs to fist deep underwater. Sometimes you sink so far down from the sun, your tongue bloats like an anglerfish floating in a well, lost, unable to breathe or speak. But each day you feel it, trying to say something about the shining dead language it once knew. Watch its cells burst into blue specks of light when you open your mouth. A tiny syllable, then darkness again, but each time a little bluer, a little more like the home you've forgotten. my stranger looking back at me from the mirror, just wanting me to reach through and hold you. Home. All the trees in the backyard have my disease. All crooked, sad things that shake and bend at the threat of teeth or touch, bleach, sugar, and rust. I think I'm afraid to stop bleeding because it means sleeping forever. On one island grows a tree called dragon's blood that bleeds red sap, and arthropods bleed blue threads. The blackfin icefish bleeds clouded milk, and far south, glacier bleeds iron oxide that still feeds an ancient ecosystem. Even flower stems bleed latex. Everything bleeds. Still, nothing so beautiful lives inside me. Nothing like the tenderness of horses, their trembling eyelids and tangled manes. Sometimes I cry in the cafe bathroom, the car, behind a tree so no one will see. Sometimes I drive out to visit a stranger's horses just to be near them, stand with them a while, with my empty hand outstretched like another animal, dark and small, coming out into the light for the first time. This one's called Legend, and it's basically about the diseases that are trapped in ice, that as the ice melts or people break it open, that since they're preserved, they presumably can infect people. And this particular story in here is based on a true story. Legend. You feel dead now, but there are ways to reach through time, to resurrect yourself. Listen, many years ago, a reindeer died from anthrax in the tundra. The ice kept its body intact, and when the permafrost melted, the carcass thawed, and the spores awoke inside its lungs and heart. Little lesions another reindeer ate and infected the herd, which all died. And the shepherd boy who tended the herd died too, after contaminating his whole village. Sometimes the horrors of the world amaze me. In laboratories, scientists have revived bacteria frozen 8 million years, and prehistoric viruses from meltwater, which became infectious in seconds. From this you learn we're never safe, but maybe it means we're never alone. Under a microscope, the bacteria in me moves like a moonfield with an amoebic flower at its center, an ancestral organ, petaled afterglow nothing can see, not even itself. I know it by the fever that waxes and wanes against my forehead, as a name you repeat to not forget, or a word for home when you're far away, that homesickness when you've never been home before. But like the miracle of the worm regrowing its head after children cut it off, can still somehow find your way back. And I do want to say that the permafrost is actually melting. It's definitely happening. I live in Fairbanks, Alaska, at where there's a lot of permafrost, and there's been all sorts of problems because of it happening, which is actually really scary. because, you know, perma meaning permanent, nobody ever expected that to happen. And so lots of things were built on it, the roads, like everything. There's whole villages that are having issues because of that. So I just want to note that in case you think that's not true. It's definitely happening. Anyway, moving on. Combustion. If a human has 206 bones, 30 trillion cells, and each cell has 100 trillion atoms, if the spine has 33 vertebrae, if each atom has a shadow, then the lilacs across the yard are nebulae beginning to star. If the fruit flies that settle on the orange on the table rise like the photons from a bonfire miles away, my thoughts at the moment of explosion are nails suspended in a jar of honey. I peel the orange for you, spread the honey on your toast. When our skin touches, our atoms touch, their shadows merging into a shadow galaxy. And if echoes are shadows of sounds, if each hexagonal cell in the body is a dark pool of jelly, if within each cell drones another cell, the moment the bomb explodes, the man's spine bends like its shadow across the road. The moment he loses his hearing, I think you are calling me from across the house because my ears start to ring. From the kitchen window, I see the lilacs crackling like static, as if erasing, teleporting, thousands of bees rising from the blossoms, tiny flames in the sun. I lick the knife, and the honey pierces my tongue, a nail made of light. My body is wrapped in honey. When I step outside, I become fire. Nebula. The anemone of your dream blooms inside its vacuum of black wind, floats in radial symmetry, a remnant of horror uprooted from its reef. You float without your body, though it lingers like a signature of your body, of the swell and implosion of your matter. You a wave that reversed, hurled into itself, but never closed its loop, like sand whirling in the desert, in that memory of violence you still can't erase. Even now, the scorpion's tail there, rippling the sand of your mind, and the man or something in that shape, asking if you're all right, and you nodding yes, as he presses his hand against your neck, between your thighs, as the sun pulses through your palms, through your chest, and how you burned open then for your world at its end, how your tongue turned to blood and your skin melted pink, your cry for someone or something heard across space, like the vibrations of distant stars, instruments had once translated into sounds for us to hear and know it was not too late to be alive, though it was. Right. This one's called Pyroclast, and it's referring basically to the pyroclastic flow that happens in one of those spectacular volcanic eruptions that destroys everything in its path. I don't know if you've seen Dunkley's Peak, but that's a good rendition of it. Anyway, Pyroblast. It can move away from a volcano to 450 miles per hour, and the temperatures could go up to 1830 degrees Fahrenheit. When my body blew open, the shadow glass cloud galloped through me, glittered my blood to boil. Pain stretched through its own opening, wheezing but alive, slick with my insides. A newborn foal, I nursed on my own milk and licked dry after rain. Fed parts of me I could survive without. A finger, a tooth, the end of my tongue. But still it tried to climb back inside, reverse as a breath, a scream. And still every cell in me was a cupful of poison dividing itself, until at its cry, my skin parted for the animal, and, exhausted, I let it come home. A heart can beat outside a body, so can a wound. Nights it climbs out of me to run with its kin, trailing my blood across fields, which yields bruises of larkspur cows eat and die. And though I hide from it, I'm relieved when it returns to sleep in me, when I wake to feel it breathing through my lungs, like a pool in a cave that ripples without wind. Terra Incognita. Out here, I'm lonely enough to open my body for anyone that finds me, hoping they'll anoint me like a primordial light loosed from a fossil, a wind trapped in ice for 4 million years. I wait here to be seen. When you reach me, you slit me from neck to groin, as if peeling a fruit you have just discovered. My pain of pearlin nectar trickling into your cupped hands like an extraterrestrial spring. You have never been hurt, never been cut in sacrament. I dare you, put your mouth to the wound you've made of me and breathe in. Revelation. I am ready to be loved by anything. For your love, I'd wash your feet, bake you bread, water your flowers when you're away. I'd sleep outside with them, would pour blood straight from my wrist to feed them. I'd cut the circle in my chest to make space for the moon. Let a star nest inside me like a scorpion, just to feel its love, though it would hurt. And though it would hurt, if I could not be loved, I'd puncture my skull through the ear and drip every dream I've had into the soil, a shadow honey for the worms to eat, as if they might know me as one of them, teach me how to move through their darkness. I'd feed my heart to a snake that would show me how to change skins, how to survive as an unlovable thing. I would cut my soul out to make room for another soul, push it out in loops, the way frost flowers in those first hours of spring push through the stems in a field, mimicking flowers. I push through myself, the way pain had pushed through my brain, like a tooth through a gum, until I could no longer contain it. Stranger, I'd even lie down for the axe if it could make me new. In my mind, the moment is so beautiful. My head will roll away from my neck, like the shadow through the eclipse, like a stone from the door of a tomb. Then I'll climb out of that body, a lamb with claws and a sleeping viper, where a beating heart should be. Lamb that could kill you if you came any closer. Lamb that eats the wildflowers from your hand without fear. Okay, this one is called Mutant, and it's somewhat inspired by the Chernobyl exclusion zone, where they've actually found that animals have really flourished. There's even an extinct horse that has flourished there that I have a poem about in my previous book. I think it's there, partly because there's no people there, that all of these animals have done so well in the radioactive landscape. Mutant. All the wildflowers turn away from me as I pull my shame up from my throat, hold it up to sunlight to inspect its anatomy. See how this organ labors to breathe in my palm. The black jellyfish, a tentacled heart still connected to me by a single blue vein. I know everything needs love, even this creature which opens despite its pain to show me its insides. A secret I cannot tell you because I also have a secret. Sometimes I pin my hair up to expose my neck to the breeze, release it in a cloud when I hear you coming. Sometimes I cover my skin when I feel your eyes, as if I might turn inside out. I am the dream with a mind but no mouth, or a mouth with dreams but no tongue. Or I'm a tongue skinned from speaking, which is like a corpse in the process of blooming, a tree that will hide it for centuries. If only I could let you inside my mouth, you'd understand why it's so hard for me to speak. Even my kisses turn to blisters. If I let you inside, you'll never find your way out. Sometimes desires can't live outside water or wombs. Some words crumble outside the mouth, like bone fragments unearthed in disaster. Let me explain. Deep within a nuclear power plant, where many men died saving their city, a mass of black corium swells inside a concrete sarcophagus. One day, its radiation will leak back out into the land, no matter how many times they try to reseal its tomb. They call this substance the elephant's foot and say its skin looks like tree bark. But even now it burns a poison light only the dead can see. And this is like me. I am an irradiated thing that needs someone to hold it closed. And no one can hold a thing like that long enough to love it, unless maybe they too have been ruined, cast out or kept hidden, named abomination after someone tried to bury their power and failed. Okay. Just two more. This is a short one called polydipsia, which is basically the clinical term for extreme thirst. As a servant of thirst, I walked my feet skinless to find this tiny jewel, the glacier kept whole and cold, as if for my mouth alone, a lost memory that pushes like a tooth through my tongue so I can taste it forever. How pure your love felt before it severed me clean from this world. Amen. Migration. Wee shadows return to the trees, scraping the ground like a snake shedding its skin, or a wolf licking a chest cavity, or your teeth against my neck in the dream I can't stop having. Though I move with the herd now, an alphabet growing under my skin, wind tracing each letter with its tongue, learning its form. Who erased your face? The wind asks. How do you see without eyes? If I could answer, I would say, I see as nectar tunneling through a moon, not through glass, but as dark that learns to love itself, as cloud tissue, as the black glue that holds each thing together, though light would separate it. I see as the tiny ripple that moves through muscle before an earthquake or massacre, the word opening its lesion, the blood of the martyr as it exits the wrist. I see through the hole in my chest that breathes as black holes had breathed against the eyes of the astronomers. When I reach the forest, the trees are soft enough to push a hand through. I find mine among them and, ready to begin the long work of growing away from the sunlight that still laps its memory at the edge of my mind, I break my spine, fold my body inside, and become paradise. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that incredible reading and for writing this just incredible book. I've been an admirer of your work for a really long time, ever since Bone Map. And I've always been drawn to your lyric intensity. I feel like that phrase doesn't quite capture it, but it's the closest that I can come to describing it. But also the imagery in your poems, which is incomparable, and how your poems are so embodied and corporeal.
Thank you.
And in Vapor, your work does something which I also very much appreciate, and that is to situate the human body squarely and inexorably as a part of a living world that is dying. And the human body as part of a larger sort of spatial, but also emotional ecosystem, if that makes any sense. But I thought for this conversation, we could start with the title of the book. You know, when I think of Vapor, you know, of course it refers to like the presence of diffused matter, right, floating through air. But it's a title that calls to mind something that looms, that's omnipresent, and has the capacity to sort of seep through boundaries that we may try to erect, right? That can almost sort of enter our bodies and as we breathe. So I'm wondering if you could speak to your decision to title the book Vapor.
Yeah. So yeah, it was pretty hard to decide on a title precisely because, as you know, like the work is very visceral, and vapor, like when you think about that, you don't necessarily, you don't think about viscerality, like, right? It's like if you said, it's diffuse, it's kind of invisible, almost. But I really like what you said about how it seeps through things, like how it breaks boundaries in some ways. So I think that's definitely part of it. I mean, I think that's accurate. I think that, you know, the book is so much about merging and blending boundaries and things, like internalizing other things, or being subsumed by other things. And so I think that's a really good observation. And part of it was very early on. One of the earliest poems, or the poem that became a series of poems, is the vapor sequence, which is essentially inspired in a lot of ways by nuclear disaster and nuclear apocalypse. As I think I said in one of in the written response to your question, this book became as essentially like an apocalyptic book with a lot of anthropocenic themes, and so that was one of the very first things that I did, and I was thinking in that case about vaporizing, right, of people or things in the path of that detonation, essentially being immediately destroyed, and becoming other matter, right? Like in some ways transforming into other matter instantaneously. And so I decided to keep that title, since that was kind of the seed of the book, was that particular sequence that is essentially about mass destruction. And I think that the book sort of ends up being about like maybe more personal or quieter psychological destruction. But so that was essentially, I think, partly why I kept it as a title. I did have friends say, well, the book is so visceral, why would you title it this? And so like I said, I think that's part of it. And I think also, like, as you noticed, it pushes through boundaries. It's kind of like a transformative force in that way. And the book is so much about transformation. So I thought that was also fitting.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can't help but think about the apocalyptic sublime,
Yeah.
which
Absolutely.
just you have an essay that appeared in the Adroit Journal fairly recently, in which you discuss what you call the apocalyptic sublime, but it's a term that, quote, this is a quote from your essay, a term originally used to describe a school of 19th century paintings that depict the world ending by biblical flood and fire and flood. So yeah, I'm wondering, like, what is it about that particular term that sort of speaks to you?
Mhm.
And maybe like how, I mean, I feel like you've probably also, been talking a little bit about how vapor fits into there, but I thought we could talk a little bit about that term.
Okay. Well, I think sublimity is obviously omnipresent in the book. Like there are certain poems that are quieter, but a lot of poems are about like intense um, fear or awe. At, for example, like the poem I read about the darkest, deepest part of the ocean, and kind of trying to inhabit that space and imagine like what that would be like, not necessarily like partly literally, but also like psychologically, or like the pyroclastic flow, like that particular apocalyptic moment. Um, Even something like a nuclear detonation, despite being extremely violent and fraught and upsetting. There's still something apocalyptic about that. I mean, sublime about that kind of moment. Um, so I think that that's part of it, is that there's the sort of apocalyptic um, note through the book, that's the anthropocenic note that that has to do with the destruction of Earth, right? And then there's like a lot in there that eventually becomes like mirrored by the psychological and the kind of feeling like you're internalizing that. I think when you have a lot of trauma and PTSD and a lot of other types of, I think that the essay that you were talking about is about bipolar and lithium, and obviously bipolar is a very intense disorder to have, and so the pain and the loneliness and the trauma of that can feel very apocalyptic, in a very intense way, like you've sort of internalized something like the apocalyptic sublime, like it feels like you're being hit by a pyroclastic flow, perhaps, or it feels like you're down in the ocean being crushed and not being able to orient yourself or see what's going on. And so, yeah, I think that there's like a note of internalized destruction and external destruction, and they're both being entangled in a way. And so yeah, I think that there's sort of two types of apocalypses going on in the book, and they're mirroring each other, paralleling each other, and often interacting with one another. But I think the sublime part is about intensity. I think you said lyric intensity, about the way that the poems are written, but also, that's kind of stimulating or creating like a sense of psychological intensity, and particularly the intensity of pain and suffering, that feels apocalyptic.
Yeah. Yeah. So you mentioned just a second ago thinking about like the mirroring between sort of an apocalypse, an external one, but an interior one as well. And I thought about this phrase that's in the description of your book on the Milkweed website, an Anthropocene for the body and the planet. I forgot the next one, but yeah, I was thinking about that. I've been thinking about that a lot this week, and what it means, what that means, an Anthropocene for a body, for a human body. Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about whether or not that was something that was referring to this sort of reoccurring idea in the book of the sort of rupture of the human body in various ways that happens, right?
Yeah.
In which something from inside the body is seeping out. Sometimes it has sort of an autonomy and comes back, right? Like in Pyroclast, and sometimes it's different, but there's that constant rupture. So yeah, is that something that for you relates to this notion of an Anthropocene for the body?
The apocalyptic sublime stuff, you mean?
No, this sort of reoccurring, sort of trying to sort of think about what the Anthropocene for the body, like how to sort of conceptualize that. And then
Okay.
I'm just sort of thinking about it alongside this sort of reoccurring idea of rupture in the book. And I wanted to know if those two things were related to you, for you.
Yeah, so I think that there's like an anthropocenic lens being used in the book, like in the sense that this sort of destruction, the ecological destruction of the earth, again, like as you said, like there's some mirroring and parallel, like it's sort of mapping that onto the body, and having, and like yes, there is like an exchange, I think, between like the ruined landscape, or I guess uh, not necessarily ruined, but the landscape may be in the process of
Yeah.
being destroyed, or ruined, or like irrevocably changed, in a way that makes it unlivable. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, and there's being like, and I think that there's like an exchange between, again, like the psychological experience of trauma and mental disorder, and the external destruction of the landscape. I did not write that. That was not my writing. So I'm not sure if I would say like an Anthropocene for the body, or I would just say that that I think that what you said about rupture is maybe apt in the sense that like there's a lot of wounds, right? There's a lot of opening and,
Yeah.
and things sort of flowing in or becoming like absorbed, or the opposite, like maybe bleeding into the landscape, like bleeding into the flowers or what have you. So I think that there's like, yes, there's a sense of like being opened up in a way that is you're irrevocably changed, right, by these things that are coming into you and sort of living there. Like another example would be the animal in prior class, right?
Yeah.
It's like the speaker is like trying to let it go, like this wound, and it keeps coming back and then the speaker just sort of accepts that it's there. And again, I think that's kind of often the process of working through trauma, and like having trauma is that kind of like not necessarily acceptance, but that kind of understanding that this thing isn't internalized in a way that you're not gonna just cut it out. like
Yeah.
like it transforms you in a way that's like irrevocable. And then part of that is thinking about like the sort of metaphorical mapping I was talking about, is thinking about how the Anthropocenic era is about how what we've done to the earth is irrevocable, right? Like this is like the earth has been fundamentally changed by what we've done, and it's never going to go back. Like, we can do all we want to like try to clean up and to reverse or whatever, but there's nothing, in some sense, there's nowhere like, you have trash like showing up in like the most remote places on earth. So yeah, yeah, I think that's definitely a big part of it.
Yeah, and it's this irrevocable change that has been wrought in the Anthropocene. It's like it's not something that we fully understand yet. We're still learning new ways in which things are irrevocably changed. And yeah, I don't really there isn't quite so much of a question attached to this, but I needed to share this with you. I read this article in Yale Environment 360 this week, and they reported on a growing concern about microplastics in the air. And I couldn't help but of course, I was, consumed by your book this week, and I was just thinking about this article. And so I just wanted to read this to you. Recent studies reveal that tiny pieces of plastic are constantly lofted into the atmosphere, while individual bits of plastic may stay in the air for only hours, days, or weeks. There's so much being kicked up so constantly that there's always some in the air. Enough that plastic bits are now also found in human lungs.
Oh my God.
It's terrifying.
That's terrifying. Yeah.
I mean, that it gets back to this notion of just sort of like the permeability of the human body, and the sort of the ways in which sort of the violence that we are is just sort of entering us, and we can't keep it out.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about that, but we've talked a lot about the Anthropocene, and I want to get to some other questions, maybe just more about just poetry and stuff. We've getting back to the notion of like reoccurring ideas. I wanted to ask you how you navigate the various motifs or images or words that reoccur in your work, right? Like skin, tongues, throats, for example. How do you navigate this in the terms of like drafting and revision? And what would you say to the many of us who also have such things that keep cropping up in our work?
Well, I think, first of all, I think it's a good thing to have those motifs and recurring words and recurring metaphors. I think sometimes I know that I maybe had some pushback on that in my MFA and maybe also my PhD programs. Like, oh, like you keep using this word over and over, you need a new word. And I'm not really sure that I agree with that, obviously, given my books, both of them. I think that repeating words and images and metaphors, I think that that helps give your like book a textural like landscape, in the sense that like you're kind of weaving or creating connections across the book so that the poems start to sort of feel connective. There's like connective tissue. There's the poems are speaking to each other in more ways than theme, like they're having there's threads, like linguistic threads. And I think I like that in a book. I don't think it's necessary for a book, but in terms of what I like to read, I like to have like a sense of immersion, like in a space, in a landscape, as I said. And I think that that kind of helps with that. But I do think that when you're working with that you need to make sure that each time it's used in a different way. Like each instance needs to be unique. Otherwise you are going to have like a monotonous, like sort of empty sort of echoing of those words and images and metaphors. And so at least I don't know how successful I have been at that in my books, but like I definitely have aimed to do that. To sort of like every time I read through and see those repeated words, to just make sure that they're working on their own, and not just like easy, like lazy, like fallbacks, And I definitely have done that before and had to sort of revise that out or figure that out, because I think it can be really easy to just be like, where these are my words and they're just sort of, I can't think of anything else to write in this line, so this is going to happen. Or sometimes that can even happen subconsciously. So I think that's important to be aware of, but I don't think that there's anything like inherently wrong with doing that.
No, I don't think so. I don't think so either. But then, if you're sort of weaving these things, these poems that they're echoing each other, but they're echoing each other in new ways and finding new resonances. But then, so what was your approach then to like ordering the poems then in the collection? I mean, do you have a specific approach to that?
Kind of. I mean, I think in terms of that, I would see like, putting poems close, like next to one another. You want to be careful about, I guess not necessarily repetition, but like redundancy or something. You just want to make sure that when poems are next to each other, that they're having like a dynamic relationship, but also that they're not like, I think, repeating each other in ways that are boring. And so yeah, I think, but ordering them, I think in this case was kind of more about maybe like the psychological progression of the book. But yeah, when I was ordering them, I definitely did think about stuff like that. I'm not sure if I have any like specific advice about that, but I would definitely say that as I was working through it, I tried to make sure that the poems felt like they were communicating in a way that I found meaningful. And so yeah, I guess I didn't really think, my cat's coming, I think too much about it. but maybe a little.
I realize that we have just a few minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that folks had an opportunity to put a question in the chat, or I don't think that there's anything in the Q&A, but I just wanted to remind folks that they can do that. And if not, I have one last question we might be able to sneak in, maybe not.
Okay.
I
Sorry,
don't-
my cat is like being a scratching post behind me. If that's what that sound was. Okay.
Okay, yeah, so my last question to you, and I know hopefully this isn't opening up an entirely new can of worms, but yeah, so I've absolutely adored the essays that you've been publishing. They're incredibly powerful, and they're incredibly so yeah, you've got the essay Annihilation that was an adroit. You have there was an essay that you wrote that references Rosemary's Baby. You have an essay that references that sort of explores Alien. So yeah, I wanted to just sort of give you this, ask you a little bit about writing nonfiction, and writing nonfiction that is autobiographical, but also about this other sort of medium of film, and sort of how all of that maybe informs your poems, or I don't know.
I mean, let me think if they inform my poems. I feel like my poems and my essays are kind of about very similar things, but in the poems it's more oblique, right? These are not like very explicitly autobiographical poems, but they are often like horrific. So I'm not necessarily sure if they inform each other. I think it's more like the essays kind of help to work through some things, and think about them in more like analytical, intellectual ways. I mean, certainly there's still some like emotional thread in there too, but I feel like the poems are like almost purely emotionally driven, and the essays are more like exploratory. So I mean, obviously I love horror. It's, these are essays are part of a book that in which various horror films are used to explore trauma and other psychological stuff that and when I grew up loving horror, so that's part of it. It's like I feel like horror films are really entwined in my identity, and I think that they're really interesting ways to explore topics, specifically trauma. But I'm not sure if I would consider them in explicit conversation. I would, however, say that they are working through very similar things, just through different angles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you so much, Sarah, for that.
Yes, we're out of time, but thank you so much, Sarah and Christopher. Sarah, I can't wait to read this horrific essay collection when it appears. That last question, as a kind of lyrical nonfiction writer, thinking about the possibilities of a dedicated poetry collection. I'm always interested in that crossover and how they resonate. Thanks for such a thoughtful discussion, you two. Thanks to all our audience tonight, and thanks to Devon, who's in the background, making sure things run smoothly. I hope everyone will come out on March 2nd for the conversation with Adrian Shirk, whose book is on utopia, but I think there's the flip side of that is dystopia, which she writes about, and I was making a lot of connections in my mind with a conversation tonight. So see you then. We'll make sure you get that live stream link. And thank you again, Sarah and Christopher. Good night, everyone. And more poetry.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.